Welcome, pudding people, to another episode of Everybody Loves Pudding. I'm your host, Ken Seymour, solo this week without our co-host, Richard Geiger, who has been called away looking in the Orient for new recipes for pudding. No, not really, but he had some familial commitments that he had to take care of, so he will be back with us in our next episode. I am lucky enough to have a wonderful guest with us today, Miss Heather Antos, a editor for Valiant Entertainment. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I am really excited. Anytime I get a chance to talk to somebody that's been involved with probably one of my favorite two industries, that being the comic book world, I get a little giddy on the inside. But what I would like to start with, if at all possible, is to have you describe what it means to be an editor, because people know what artists do, people know what inkers do, people know what writers do. Editors, when you're talking about a book, it means maybe one thing. I think maybe people don't have a complete image of what it means to be an editor for comic books.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question. And honestly, it's the question that I asked ages ago, which first got me interested in becoming a comic book editor based on the answer. So I think it's very valid. No, I think what it means to be a comic book editor is basically you are for a company like Valiant or Marvel or DC, is at the end of the day, you are the keeper of the keys. It is your job to protect the integrity of the character and the stories first and foremost. But it's also to create a lot of really cool stuff. I like to compare it to, it's a lot like being a TV producer or a film or theater producer. You wear a lot of hats. You're managing schedules, you're managing budget, you're coming up with story ideas, you are casting talent. You are making sure all your deadlines are being hit. You're given notes on story, on art, on covers, on design. And you're making sure it's the very best product that it can be. And that everyone is getting along as best as they can in order to do the very best work that they can in a set schedule, and doing it for, 10 to 20 projects at a time.
That sounds like it can be a little difficult to juggle at times.
Well, that's what coffee's for, my friend. That is coffee.
Yeah. I do know the wonders of caffeine, although I'm trying to cut back myself. So the projects that you work on, unlike a television series or unlike a movie or something like that, or even a book where you have kind of a set beginning and a set ending, and you have a certain amount of time it's going to take to put it together, comics are constantly being released. How does that affect things?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of planning ahead. There are some series that are planned to be mini-series from the beginning. They're planned to be 4, 5, 6 issue, complete stories that sometimes do so well that we're asked to continue them, midway through, which is great, is fantastic, but it's always like, but we had an ending planned. So then it's, you have to come up with a season 2, season 3. Other stories, these are your, for Valiant, it's your X-O-Man Awards, your Bloodshots, your Batmans, your Iron Mans, your flagship characters. These guys are planned as ongoings, and ideally the plan is to have them ongoing and for as long as they possibly can sustain sales. And so for that, how Valiant does things is we plan a year at a time. So I will work with a writer and, what does year 1 of X-O-Man Award look like? And we'll come up with a broad scope. And then we'll break down the arcs individually and really hone those out. And so obviously arc 1 is going to going to get the most attention, and we'll kind of figure our arcs 2 and 3 a little bit. We'll have like bullet points of each issue, but then as we get closer to writing, that's when we'll sit down and hone them out. Very similar again to, I think, how a television show writer's room type situation is. A showrunner will come in. One of my favorite examples is Supernatural. Will come in and, they pitched the first 5 seasons, and they had a clear idea of this is the whole story. This is what seasons 1 through 5 are. Specifically, here's season 1. Here are all the scripts. And when the show turned out to be a super, super huge hit, it was like, okay, but what's season 6? What's season 7? What's season 8? Et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So is there a difference between the way that the Valiant runs things, the way that you run things at Valiant, as opposed to, say, the other companies? Because I know Valiant's got a very different lineup of comics than Marvel or DC has. And a lot of times with the other companies, you've got these huge crossovers that affect all of the titles. Does Valiant have the same kind of things that they try and do? Does it affect things, or is it a completely different animal?
I mean, it is at the end of the day a completely different animal. We are an independent comics publisher as opposed to a major corporate machine. That's not to say we don't do events that do line ride crossovers. In fact, I think it was in 2015, it was Valiant who released the biggest selling independent crossover event of the decade with Book of the Death. So
that was pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. But it is something that Valiant does do. Valiant has done. We've had Harbinger Wars. We just did Incursion. But whereas I think the way that Valiant approaches it differently is Marvel and DC, I think, tend to approach these, and at the end of the day, the goal of a crossover is to get people who aren't picking up other characters' books to become interested in the universe as a whole and interested in different characters that might not already be reading. That's the marketing machine behind it. And the way that Marvel and DC will tend to do it is DC likes to do their crossovers, and Marvel's done this too, crossing different books so that a reader has to pick up part 1 that's in Batman, but part 2 is Detective Comics, part 3 is in Batwoman. And so you are picking up and experiencing actual literal different titles than you're normally experiencing.
Sure.
Marvel likes to do it where you have one big crossover event books such as Civil War, Original Sin, et cetera, but then you have tie-ins across a bunch of different things where if you want the whole story, you have to pick up all of these tie-ins. And it's just a lot. At the end of the day, it gets to be overwhelming. You feel like you might have missed something, and so you stop reading altogether. But the nice thing, I think, and what I appreciate with how Valiant tends to do their crossovers, like Harbinger Wars, like Book of Death, is it's in one mini-series like we talked about before. It's in one single book that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't get tie-ins across the different books. You can, if you want to read the event, you can read the event. And if you don't, you don't have to. It's not forced down your throat, so to speak.
That definitely makes sense, and it could especially help, especially as the prices of comics have increased over the years, and having to sometimes make some tough choices about what entertainment to spend your money on. You can feel like you've really gotten your money out of it with a format like that.
Absolutely. I feel like you as a consumer, you feel like you have a lot more autonomy over the decisions you're making.
So you've been an editor for a little while now. So I try to be as vague as possible because occasionally the information that I get is not. How long have you been an editor?
I mean, if we want to get esoteric, I have been editing stories my entire life. No. No, professionally, I have been an editor for, goodness, 6 years now. I started off professionally doing creator-owned and indie publishing. From there, I went to Marvel. From there, I went back to the indie world, and now I'm at Valiant.
Okay. So now you've had, obviously, since you've been doing this your entire life, we're going to take it from that direction. What is your favorite part of the editorial process? What really kind of gives you that internal squeal of joy?
Oh my goodness. Two big things. I would say one is, sitting down and breaking a story. And like, you hit that aha moment with an artist, or that aha moment with a writer, and it all just clicks and it all just makes sense. And, I really don't know how to describe that feeling other than like this like great creative achievement. It's just like super, super cool to like, all the pieces are finally fitting into place. It's so much fun. And then, the fan interaction at the end of the day is, we are all creating these stories to put out into the world and to hopefully connect with people like you and all across the world. And it's when you create something that is truly bringing others joy, like that's why we do it. And there's just no greater feeling than, actually seeing that come to fruition and knowing that you made someone's day a little bit brighter.
That does sound like it could be pretty rewarding. So is there a particular project? I mean, you've been part of some pretty neat stuff up until this point. Is there something that you're particularly proud of at this point, or even if it's more than one thing that really kind of keys in your mind? It's like, we made this, and it wasn't just good; it was fantastic.
I mean, hands down, I have to say, being a co-parent of Gwenpool, co-creating her with Chris Hastings and Chris Pachalo and Greer Hero over at Marvel, like, and just seeing this, what started out as a variant cover, get her own backup story, get her own series, get cameos in other books, get toys, get statues, get T-shirts, cosplayers, little girl, like all the little girl cosplayers I see, all the dads telling me that, they finally have a book that they can read with their little girls. And, she's a character you can unlock in video games. Like, that's so cool. She's in the Marvel Lego video game. Like, that is the coolest thing
that is neat.
In the entire world. And it all started with a what if, right? And so to see it reach that level, is super cool. And there's just no telling where she's going to go next. And that's really, really exciting. And then I think on a little bit more of another angle of the creative side, one of the things that we literally just released on Valiant, were the Livewire fashion magazine variant covers. Which was just so much fun to do, to kind of express this character through the lens of, actual everyday media, and play with article headlines as they would appear in the Valiant universe, and get to work with great artists like Chris Anka and Irene Coe and Annie Wu and Kevin Wada. And it was just so much fun. It was just so much fun. And to debut them on the Nerdist was really cool.
Yeah, that looked like it was a lot of fun. So now that you've been on this side of the I assume that you were a fan well before you got into the comic book world, because the joy is definitely coming through. What is it? How has being an editor affected you in how you consume the product? Do you kind of look at things with a slightly different lens than you did before, or are you still enjoying things like you did before you ever entered the realm of what you do now?
I think I appreciate them more. I think I appreciate the time that it takes to create a single issue. And, I didn't, pre-Marvel especially, I didn't understand how much a single editor is responsible for and how many hats they wear. And, you're wrangling literally 50 different people at a time. And to get covers and interior pages and coordinate with other offices that are using your characters or that you're tying in a different story to, or dealing with licensees, or and so the fact that we're able to get a single one of these things to print every month, let alone the thousands that we get, the hundreds of these that we get every single month, is nothing short of miraculous. Yeah, and then you get, to get some of these old classic guys who don't draw anymore, don't write anymore, and they're not used to hitting these monthly deadlines anymore, and to get them to do, for Marvel 1000, we're getting these guys out of retirement to contribute a single page. Like, that is a miracle. That is a blessing from God. He's giving us Barry Kitson back in comics, and it's great. It's just fantastic.
That does sound pretty awesome. Well, what were some of your favorites back in the day when you first started getting into this sort of a thing? And how's that kind of changed over time?
I don't think it's changed more so than, I guess, gotten a little bit more esoteric, as I think, we all do through art. But I've always been a horror fan through and through. Sandman and Hellblazer were my introduction to comics. I mean, all the Vertigo stuff, Why the Last Man, Transmetropolitan, all of that. Like, that is my heart and soul. That is my baby in comics. That's my wheelhouse. And so, R.I.P. Vertigo. It's no longer around. It's very sad.
Yeah.
But I think we all feel that a lot of what Image has been doing recently has kind of taken over the Vertigo vein, and we're getting some really good stuff. And right now, truly, I think it's the best time for horror in comics. Colin Bunn is doing some of the work of his career. Justin Jordan's doing some great stuff. Brian Azzarello is doing some really cool things. There's Junji Ito. I can't, there's just a plethora of great horror and thriller out there. And I'm excited to be creating more of that.
Yeah, and like hack slash and things like that are just, there's so much. It seems like there's so much more possibility, and that may not be the best way to put it, because everything is cyclical in a certain sense. I mean, but superhero comics dominated for so long, but that wasn't always the case. You had romance comics, you had war comics, you had
crime
westerns.
Comics.
Exactly. Not Tales of Suspense, but Tales from the Crypt was real popular. Yep. Vault of Horror, things like that. They had a place, and it feels kind of like that's got a resurgence in a way.
A little bit, yeah, absolutely. A little bit, it's kind of like every once in a while you hear just marketing sales teams from companies across the board. Horror doesn't sell, romance doesn't sell, like blah 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 doesn't sell, and it's like, yeah, okay, but and it only takes the one. And especially right now, I think in Hollywood, we're seeing such an insane resurgence of horror. I mean, nostalgia is the thing right now. That's the big thing right now. But horror is thriving so strongly in comics, and I am here for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. I mean, just looking at the television and movie side of things, Stranger Things being a great example of that, even if some of the 80s timing placements in the film, I think that's maybe the most joy that I get out of it. Seeing it in there, and then seeing all of the really obsessive people say, well, this didn't happen at this time. It happened at this time.
I mean, you're always gonna get that, right? Like that's
yeah, but it's mildly entertaining in its own right. So I know you haven't been with Valiant for a real long time, but a lot of our listening audience, I'm sure, is familiar with Valiant. I think a lot of them are not, though. They maybe know Marvel, they maybe know DC, if only through the movies, and some may not understand a little bit of the history of the company. Is that something that you could speak to?
Briefly, yeah. Basically, 1989, 1990, the former editor-in-chief of Marvel's Jim Shooter, along with a couple other people that had left Marvel in the 80s, started their own publisher called Voyager, out of which Valiant was actually an imprint. Valiant, I think Valiant's first title was Magnus Robot Fighter. And then we had Solar and Rai kicked off the scene, and it took off, and it did really, really well. And, kind of took over the Voyager name. Valiant became, the big overseer. They got popular. Barry Windsor Smith, Bob Layton came on board. And that's when Acclaim, I think it's Acclaim Entertainment, not Acclaim Comics, but Acclaim bought out Valiant in 94 until they went bankrupt in the early 2000s. And after that, a group of, just basically hardcore Valiant fans not took over, but they got investors and basically relaunched the company. And what was it? Like 2012, I think, was the big relaunch. The summer of Valiant, as they like to say, 2012, and released all these new lines of books, and have kind of been punching above their weight class ever since in the Diamonds charts, all the way to 2018 when Valiant again was invested in and bought and taken over by DMG Entertainment, which is studios tied with China. They've worked with the Looper films. They're working with Sony on the new Bloodshot movie. Now we have the Bloodshot film starring Vin Diesel coming out next year, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
Very, very, very exciting. But Valiant has been known for always. It's an independent comics company that acts like it's part of the big two.
as it well should.
Absolutely. Our characters, yes, we don't have the 80-year history and legacy that Marvel or DC does, but because of that gives us, I think, a lot more freedom with our characters and our history and our stories that Marvel and DC, being corporate entities, just don't have. So it's actually really exciting to get to be a part of Valiant at this time when it's kind of redefining its place in the industry and redefining what it means to be Valiant, what it means to be a Valiant character in a Valiant book. We're a universe where dead characters stay dead. I mean, like that's
a really refreshing thing.
There are actual consequences for what happens in our stories. If we wanted to kill a character like that, it is going to impact the universe in a way that, Marvel and DC just can't do.
Yeah, it seems a lot of times that the investment and the bottom line of the money that is produced from the interest in the character drives the story rather than what can potentially actually make the story better. I know personally, I've been a comic fan for a very long time, and I at one point saw the way DC was doing things. It looked like they were setting up the new people to take over the mantle when the one person would die. So like you're saying, there's consequences, and it looked like they would do it. And then, we're just going to bring him back. And it was always a little disheartening because there was just, it makes time not quite mean anything.
No, exactly. And it also makes, the death ofs, right? Like, fans don't bat an eye. Death of Wolverine, and I was there for it. Death of Wolverine, it's like, yeah, but we know he's coming back, so which is the thing. I was like, no, the ballsiest thing Marvel would do is actually kill Wolverine. Maybe they will one day, who knows.
Probably not. Especially with the current ownership, probably not.
I know, but I'm always going to be hopeful for the potential that is there.
Yeah. So one of the big things about the history of Valiant that I kind of wanted to kind of address is, I know when I first started reading Valiant, it was in a lot of ways trying to be, like you're saying, like the big two, but in the way I saw it as the consumer of the product was, it's all superhero stuff. That's not the case today. What is the landscape like with Valiant for those that might not be completely familiar with it?
Yeah, so we do have our tried and true superheroes. I like to say, we have Faith and Exo Man of War, which are our big superheroes. Livewire, which is a book that I'm on right now, which is a very superhero. That's your cape and uniforms type books. And then you have your more horror, supernatural stuff with Dr. Mirage and Punk Mambo and Shadow Man. Where, you have these people that have ties to the dead side being, I don't know entirely too much about the voodoo religion, so I don't want to, speak out of turn, but it's essentially like an equivalent of hell, or a wayside to hell. And so, Jack Boniface, who is Shadow Man, is bound to the Shadow Loa to basically keep hell from creeping over into Earth from time to time, which is a lot of fun.
And I gotta say,
and Punk Mambo's a British version of that with the pink mohawk, and it's great.
That is probably my favorite current new name that I hadn't been completely familiar with. I always love superhero names that will stick, and that's one I won't forget. It's just
Punk Mambo.
Yeah. It's kind of rolls off the tongue.
Oh, absolutely. It's super fun, and she's super rad. You have Dr. Mirage, who speaks to ghosts, which is great. It's always useful to have a medium around, I think. And then you have your more gritty, dark, street level type characters like Peter Stanchek and Harbinger, who is a Psyot. Who is the most powerful telepath, almost omnipotent Psyot around, who is struggling with the burden of being just that and what that means. And then you have Bloodshot, obviously, it's the Vin Diesel movie coming out, who is a government sanctioned Psyot hunter. So yeah.
I love seeing that's the continuity too. From the old days. Since Bloodshot's been around for a while, so is Exo Man of War, and that it's kind of interesting seeing the storytelling changes that have happened in the comics. Whether you consider them just differences in storytelling method or an advancement, an improvement, whichever you want, but the stylistic changes to the art is really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I haven't read I will be honest, I haven't read too much of the original stuff from the 90s. I've dug into it a little. We have a couple of copies of things around the office, but it's hard to get your hands on hard copies of things, and I hate reading digitally. I just can't do it. It's very, very hard for me to grasp. But one of these days, it's not the same, and I just don't process it as well. It's just how my brain works. But one of these days I'll dig in. I have read a lot of the original Bob Layton Shadow Man, which is just, it's truly fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems
90s,
like it's
the
changed
90s
a
were a
too.
different time in comics.
Yeah, they were really different. So now that you're working on Livewire, obviously you want to kind of make an impact. What is your kind of your dream, your hope working with Valiant right now? What is it that you really want to achieve?
Oh man. Well, it's funny because I am getting to do it, but I can't talk about it yet.
Oh. Sigh. I kind of thought I might run into that.
I have 5 or 6 titles right now that I can't talk about, and it's so hard. Because it's all the like art is sitting in front of my desk in my office, but I can't show anyone, and it's just it's killing me. I just want to share with the world. But no, it's I can tease into like anyone who follows me on Twitter or anyone who has heard me on other podcasts know like I love crime. Like my first comic I created was a crime anthology, and that's what got me noticed by Marvel and got me in the door. And I love horror. Like I love horror comics so much. And when I came and when I started with Valiant, I noticed they really didn't have those genres, and now they might. And that's all I'll say there.
I think that's more than sufficient, because the last thing I want to do is verge into territory that might get you in trouble, even if I'm salivating here for the details. Well, maybe we can venture into the more general. We kind of touched on this just a little bit, but kind of we've talked about how the comic industry was and how it's changed a little bit. What do you think about the state of the industry today? This is a very different environment than it used to be in terms of trying to get the product to the customer, to get new readership, to change. What can you tell me about what you think about how things operate now?
Yeah, I think, everyone and not being in marketing and not being in sales, I only being on the creative side, I can only speak to too much. But the direct market is our biggest ally, and it's our biggest hurdle right now. Trying to get comics, trying to get people who aren't already coming to comic shops to pay attention to comics is very, very difficult. Right. Because, I can trust that people who are already aware of and coming into comic shops are buying comics. But I can't trust that, because we don't have this stuff at the supermarket racks anymore, because we don't have the newsstands, because we don't, because Barnes and Noble's comic selection is only so big, and they're only pushing, really Marvel, DC, or anything that has a TV show.
Because you can't even find a Barnes and Noble's anymore.
Exactly. Like it is very, very hard and difficult to get in front of to get new readers. And so that, I think, is the industry's biggest hurdle right now. I think, slowly, the publishing industry, I think the publishing industry as a whole has kind of figured it out with graphic novels, with YA. Those are booming. Raina Telgemeier has that shit on lock. And, DC is starting to get into their young readers line, which I think is brilliant. And Marvel has been slowly getting into that too. And I think, getting into schools and getting into libraries and breaking down the barrier that comics has had for the longest time, that comics aren't literature, right? We've had a lot of hurdles. A lot of hurdles for decades of, well, if it has pictures, it's not literature.
Real reading, yeah.
Right, it's not real reading, and it's like, right, but like Shakespeare's literature and, you know, this Renoir or this Matisse over here is art. We put them together and all of a sudden it's for kids. Like,
yeah, I definitely see you there.
I don't understand. And there's been this disconnect for a really, really long time. And, you know, I do think part of the success of Hollywood turning to comics for content is helping teachers and librarians and everything open up to using comics to teach to read, to using comics to tell stories, but also just the fact of the generations that read comics as kids are now growing up and making them and becoming teachers and becoming parents and becoming, you know, they're sharing their childhood with the next generation. And so I think branching out beyond comic stores is our biggest hurdle. And until the industry steps away from the direct market, which only deals with comic stores, we're in a bit of an impasse, I feel.
Do you think that other media could potentially be an avenue in order to reach a new readership? I mean, obviously with the boom of television shows and movies based upon comic books, there's definitely people that are willing to watch. Is there a way, do you think, to use that as a method of getting people back into the actual physical books themselves?
I think so. I think that comes down to the studios, though, because, you know, Walking Dead for so many people is just a TV show. They have no idea it's based on a comic.
Right.
All the comic readers know that Walking Dead or that The Kitchen or that, you know, Good Omens or Sandman or, you know, anything, name anything, right? They know that all of these, Batman, everything comes from comics. But for some people, the Batman movies, well, that actually comes from just the Burt Ward, Adam West TV show. Like, that's all that is. Like, they truly might not even, or the cartoon series, they truly might not even know that it comes from comics. And so I think that comes from, you know, like before a trailer before the next Avengers movie, like have that be an ad for comics. Go to your local comic store.
Yep.
Something like that, where it's getting in front of new eyes and saying, hey, you like this? Check this out. Because right now that's not happening from the Hollywood side. It is only happening from the comic side. So we're only telling people that are already reading comics.
Yeah. I saw one instance in recent memory where it almost seemed like they were kind of trying to do that with Sony's release of Venom. They gave a Venom comic to the viewers that went to see the movie. That seemed like an interesting step in that direction, but it was almost more like, here's something that you can throw away when you go home, rather than more of an urging, hey, look where all this other stuff comes from.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've heard of stores, like local comic shops doing like opening weekend things at their local theaters, which I think is a great step. But I think, you know, it can't be as isolated as that. Like, I think that's great. And I think more stores should come up with partnerships and things like that. I think that's brilliant, but it can't be isolated. It can't just be localized. It has to be an industry-wide push.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. But kind of on that movie television side, I mean, you've talked about a couple of the neat Valiant things that are going to be in the process of being adapted. Is there either a Valiant title or some other comic property that you would just love to see adapted into another medium?
Oh my God, Shadow Man, hands down. Hands down.
I mean,
we have the old Shadow Man video game, which is super cool. Right. But I think a Shadow Man TV show would be super, super cool. I mean, that would be a lot of fun. I mean, I'm always going to say Gwenpool, right? Like Gwenpool, yeah. I want to see get a TV show. But I think, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the works behind the scenes. I don't know how much has technically been announced. So again, I don't want to say.
Makes sense.
But Bloodshot's just the tip of the iceberg, and I can't wait for people to see what's been happening there, and they're going to get to see it sooner rather than later. And if you like it, go see it again and tell everyone to go see it, because that's how you're going to get more.
Yeah. I think that has a chance to be something a little fresher, maybe. I mean, there are more people that are casually aware of DC and Marvel characters over the years. Maybe not so many that are aware of what it means. What is Bloodshot? Who is he? What is the story behind it? So I think people may have more of an open mind going into seeing that movie and having a chance to be really impressed.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think, I'm very curious to see what people think of this interpretation. I'm very curious to see what people just think of the character, for the people that are fans of the Punisher, or for people that are fans of Wolverine, or for people who are fans of Deadpool, like kind of the like-minded characters. I'm super, super, super curious to see, their take and their interest on Bloodshot and the Valiant universe.
Definitely so. Well, since we have had a really fun conversation, I always like to end on just a couple of questions. Usually this is a question that my co-host would ask, but since he is not here, I will ask it for him. You are currently in New York, right? So he often loves to know, are you a New York pizza kind of person or a Chicago pizza kind of person?
Oh, see, you're pulling at my heartstrings here. So I grew up an hour outside of Chicago. So that's my backyard I grew up in. But also New York pizza, duh.
Because you gotta so much good stuff. And then the other question that he would normally ask, again, kind of the fun personality kind of thing. We also, in addition to covering comics and comic related stuff, we're huge music fans. So who are some of the musicians that you love, that inspire you, that kind of fuel you through your day, your week, your year?
Well, my favorite band of all time is Coheed and Cambria.
Nice.
And Claudio Sanchez, of which is a huge comics fan. He has the Omri Wars, which he writes with his lovely wife, Chandra. So they're comic fans as well. I'm a big fan of Say Anything with Max Bemis, who is also a comics writer. It's weird. All the musicians I listened to growing up actually are comics writers. It's this weird thing, but I love it. I think it's fantastic. And, I'm a huge fan of classic rock, of, Queen, AC/DC, and all of that. I like music that fuels your mood, man.
Right. Well, fantastic. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you coming on to our little show here and taking some time to give us a little bit of a perspective and flavor of what it is to be you, and to help contribute to the stories that can make some people smile.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
I cannot wait to get a chance to talk to you again. Maybe I'll run into you in a convention or something.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Fantastic.